Are you thinking about playing Stable Duel? Well, don't do it before watching this show and getting some advice from a top 12, that's right, top 12 Stable Duel player. Let's go. Welcome back, everybody, to All In with Colin. I am your host, Colin Shee, and I'm so glad you can join us, and I'm so excited for this week's episode. That's right, we have a top 12 Stable Duel player as our guest. If you're not familiar with Stable Duel is like your daily fantasy for horse racing. And what we'll do here is we'll give you a little demo of what Stable Duel looks like, and then we'll bring in Matt DeSantis, who will certainly give us some awesome advice on putting together the stables. This isn't about picking your winners for tomorrow's race. This is going to be some content that you can come back and use as a reference and hopefully learn what you should be looking for when you're putting together those stables. So here is a look at what Stable Duel is. As you can see here, this is the lobby when you first enter. At the bottom, you can select the tracks that you're going to play for that day. For example, tomorrow, if you look at Penn National, and this is a superb thing that Stable Duel does, is they have a ton of free contests where you can win real money. So you have plenty of opportunities to practice on these free contests and get a feel for what it's like. So let's enter this free contest at Penn National. And what you're brought is the screen that you're similar if you play daily fantasy, especially something like the PGA, where you have a stable to fill 10 slots and $50,000. Hit select horse and you will see the card for that day, race 1, race 2, race 3. And the horses have an associated cost with them based on the morning line odds. And that's going to be something that's important that we'll talk about with Matt here in a minute. All you have to do is if you select here number 3, Secret Lily, it'll bring you to a couple of stats. There's a smaller past performances here to show the last 5 races. There's a speed rank and a value rank that Stable Duel assigns these horses. Lifetime earnings and some workouts, but you could always go and look at your PPs to decide, is Scarlet Lily a good price when you're looking at it for $8,000, or for those of you that play pari-mutually at 3-1. Let's say she is. We'll add her to our stable. You now have your first horse in your stable with a remaining salary of $42,000, and so on you go till you fill out your stable. There's this point system. Once your stable is complete and the races go off, if your horse wins, it's worth 60 points. However, they also add in by length. So if your horse wins by 3 lengths, you'll get 63 points for that particular race. If your horse comes in second, you'll get 40 points. But because he or she lost by 3 lengths, say, you subtract that from your 40 and you get 37 points. And they have a whole breakdown on their website that is surely something that you'd want to check out before you start playing. But let's take a look at those standings that I was talking about. Let's do a little user profile comparison between myself and Matt DeSantis, known as Failed to Menace on Twitter, Tupaloop on Stable Duel. As you can see, he's a top 12 ranked player. I'm ranked 575, but as you can see, it's something that I've just gotten into. I have 51 contests under my belt. A lot of those are the free contests where sometimes you just want some action, so you'll throw a stable in and maybe it's something you could follow without putting a lot of effort into. At the bottom, it gives you a nice breakdown of your finishes of the horses that you've selected between win, play, show, 4th and 5th. 16% win percentage for myself. I got to catch up to Matt, who's 19% win. I do like that we both have an average finish of 4. And so with that, I'm so excited to welcome in the man, the myth, the legend. When you sent me the rankings, I said, oh my God, he's 12th. He is a legit. I have a legit guest on my show this week. How are you doing, Matt?
I'm doing great, Colin. Thank you so much for having me. Always enjoy talking to Stable Duel, enjoy talking horses, and really enjoyed interacting with you on social media over the last few months. So this is great to finally chat with you in person vis-a-vis the computer and everything.
It's such a great thing that I've learned is the social media connection that I've been able to make with other horse players, because when you're at the track, I've always had this mentality that I need to beat every single person that's around me. When you get into the community of Twitter and you realize, well, we're all wanting to win, and eventually that's beating each other. But there's such a great support system that I found, and you've been part of that, and I appreciate your advice in kind of getting this started. And you've been a model of that community that I talk about, that you like to hear, and that's what this show is about: is getting these voices and all these different opinions on a whole variety of topics in horse racing. And Stable Duel is one of the ones that I wanted to touch upon, and who better than to bring on you, who I continue to just see your success on the platform. Although
Yeah,
I think you got to
I've
look
been,
out for your father. You got to look out for your father.
yeah, no, I do. I've got my dad into it, and it's funny. My dad's a lot like you. He started out just playing free games. He was really, he didn't really know much about it, and he just kind of dipped his toe into the free games. But he had some success there after a while. There was a rocky start, and but he kept at it. And when you're not losing any money, it doesn't really affect you one way or the other, and you can kind of try things out for a while. But he managed to kind of finish in the money a few times, and then it finished in the money a few more times, and then he started entering some actual dollar contests, and he's had some success with those, and kind of slowly built up a bankroll. But he's a very conservative player, so he always is like, he's like, I'm going to do 2 entries in the $2 game today. This is going to be pretty crazy. And I'm like, all right, Dad, you spend your $4. That's good. And he gets excited about it. But it's a fun thing to do with the whole family. My sister even plays as well. She just picks out horses by the names that they have. She knows nothing about the sport at all. But she plays the free contest as well. So it's something for every skill level. I think that's what I really like about Stable Duel.
And as we, I like to consider this episode about advice to people that are new to horse racing. The advice that I would always give is start small and learn the game with small bets of $2 and $4. And you can still have fun that way. And Stable Duel is an excellent opportunity where you can play for free and handicap and get a sense of what horse racing is, because there's so much to it. And that's what really attracts all of us, is the puzzle that is horse racing, is what I always talk about on this show, and wanting to figure out what angle am I going to take in order to figure out that puzzle for this particular day. As someone in operations, that's what drives me. So it's a great way for your whole family to get involved, and that's awesome. When you are, and we're going to break this down from the very beginning, how do you decide which race you're going to, or which stable you're going to get into on a particular day? Now, I know for them, I might just join the free game to get into it. But for someone like you who's played so many times, are you pre-handicapping and then selecting where you're going, or are you looking at the entry costs? What's your approach?
That's a good question. So I do both a little bit. So one, I do pay a lot of attention to entry costs. So I'm a little bit more of a conservative player. I get that from my dad, I guess. So I do tend to enter a lot of the smaller dollar contests. So every week, Stable Duel posts their weekly lineup on their website, usually on a Monday. And so you can see all of the contests for the upcoming week that Monday. And so I usually kind of circle all the contests that are like $10 or less entry fees. And I kind of take a look at what tracks those are on and kind of what days those are and that sort of thing. And those are the contests that I really focus on, especially the weekday contests, because I don't have a ton of time to do a lot of handicapping during weekdays, or for like a Tuesday card at Parks, for instance. And so it's one of those where I don't necessarily want to put $75. I don't want to enter a $75 contest if I don't really have hours to pour over the PPs and to really spend time digging into a card. I'd much rather enter a $3 contest in that case. And hey, maybe I read the card really well and I hit a lot of winners and I do well, and that's great. And if I don't do as well, it's not the end of the world. It's $3. That's fine. And then usually the weekend contests are centered around tracks that are having some graded stakes events. And so I'm usually really handicapping those. And so for those contests, I'll typically enter, slightly higher dollar contest because I've really taken a look over the whole card. I've had the whole week in some cases to look over the PPs for that particular card. So I feel a little bit more confident. So combination of what tracks do I like as well. I'll be honest, like a track like Gulfstream Park is a track that I've just done really, really well at on Stable Duel. And so I'm always kind of, I have a predilection for kind of going and kind of veering towards Gulfstream a lot of times. Sam Houston, when they were running there in Texas, I had a lot of success there. Right now at Assiniboia up in Canada, having a lot of success up there. So there are certain tracks where I've just kind of found a little bit of a niche I feel good about. It's funny, in the intro, you showed the Penn National card. I actually grew up about 45 minutes from Penn National, but that is a track I just have zero feel for. And so I will enter the free contest there all the time. But if I see anything over $10, I'm like, I'm out. I'm not, no matter how. And I've done really well in some of those free contests at Penn National, but I don't have a ton of confidence there on a daily basis. So approach it in a few different ways. And I think for people starting out, that's the beauty of Stable Duels. It's not just the free contests, but if you just want to, put in and deposit a small amount of money, they have a lot of $2, $3, $5, $7, $10 contests. So you can play for money with a little bit larger pot, but still not really spend that much money until you build up to those, $50, $75 contests later on.
Yeah, and I haven't entered any of those big ones yet, but I have to ask you, do you play pari-mutually as you do Stable Duel? Because one thing that I always struggle with is I try to keep my NHC play, my Stable Duel play, and my pari-mutual betting all separate. Because what I was doing was, I've done all this handicapping, and these are my NHC picks, so I need to bet every single one of them, right?
Yeah.
And that could cost you, that could be an expensive game, especially when you're playing those differently than you would a pari-mutual game. But then when you sit there and you're hitting 8-1, 9-1, 10-1 in your Stable Duel, you're like, oh my god, why couldn't I could be making so much money right now. Is that something? Do you mix the two, or do you kind of stick to one and let your money go in Stable Duel?
It's a good question. I typically, it's funny. I think over the last month, I've actually started playing them a little bit more simultaneously, where I'll play Stable Duel, and then I'll feel really good about a couple of picks. And sometimes it's just also because Stable Duel is, the costs for a horse in the Stable Duel app are pegged on the morning line odds. And so I really will kind of be paying attention right up until the last second of post time to see how much the odds fluctuate. And that'll really sometimes be a big difference for me whether or not I decide to bet on a horse or not. But yeah, I'll sometimes play simultaneously. Other times there are unfortunately some tracks that Stable Duel is not able to offer contests at because there are a lot of kind of state regulations. So for instance, New York tracks currently are not offered on Stable Duel. Churchill Downs is a separate entity and not offered. So when those tracks have big days, that's a little bit easier because I'll just bet Saratoga, for instance, and then I'll be playing Gulfstream Park on Stable Duel, so I can keep them a little separate. But I've started to do a little bit of crossover, and of course I was kicking myself the other day. There was an 8-1 horse that I selected in Stable Duel. I ended up not choosing to bet pari-mutually, and of course the horse ended up winning. That's the life of a horse player, right?
It drives you nuts.
You don't make. Yep, absolutely.
It'll absolutely drive you nuts. For people that are getting into this game, get used to I should have done that, but I did it here, and you suddenly have all these angles that are in your head, and you're telling your friend, and they're like, dude, that's you, not me.
Exactly.
So I'm generally a play, like you said, smaller amounts, $2 and $3, depending upon that day, how much time I have, and how much I want to handicap is basically what I decide. If I only have a small amount of time, playing Stable Duel is a great option. $2, $3, I can get some handicapping in, and I can have a little skin in the game, where I'm not losing my shirt on the pari-mutual game. So you've picked your game, and now you've entered in your stable. Where's kind of the first place you go? For me, I always like to look and find the highest price horse, and then go right to the PPs and decide, can I beat this horse? And because I am much more of a middle of the road. I'm not going to take the highest price horses, and I'm usually not going to take the $0 and $50 horses. I kind of stay in the middle.
Right.
That's my approach, and it's literally the first thing I do. Scroll through the app, who's the most expensive horse, and go to the PPs. Is that a smart approach? Is that what you do, or you approach it differently?
I usually go to the PPs first, and I worry about the app later. And part of it is I played enough where I just know how much the costs are in my head, because and maybe that's a problem on my part that I play too much. But I just kind of, when I look through the PPs, I just already know 8-1 is $3,000 and 4-5 is $11,000. And so I kind of can keep track of that when I'm going through. But I will say, typically the first thing I do is I'll take a very quick glance through the PPs, and I'll try to identify a couple of things. I'll try to identify what are the 2 or 3 favorites who I think are, or not even, when I say favorites, I don't necessarily always mean the morning line favorite, but who are 2 or 3 horses that I absolutely am willing to spend up on in my stable that I'm willing to spend $8,000 or $9,000 or even maybe, close to $10,000 on in my stable because I feel so confident in that particular horse. A horse like Flightline, for instance, kind of comes to mind. Or a horse like Speaker's Corner or Life is Good. When those horses run in those contests at Stable Duel, sometimes you just kind of circle and go, listen, I'm using this horse. And so you kind of go through the card and you go, where am I most confident? And where do I just think this horse is a no-brainer to win? And then the second thing I do is I kind of go through and I try to find the most vulnerable favorites on the card or the most vulnerable races where I think there's a live long shot. And a lot of times I look at maiden claiming races. That's usually like a bread and butter race I go to for there's going to be some long shot potential here because a lot of these horses have been kicking around for a little while, have dropped down in class or maybe switching surfaces, trying to find something to get them into the winner's circle. And so sometimes you can find those, there's an equipment change or a trainer change or a surface switch that you think is going to really work. You can find those angles that can really help. So I try to isolate kind of my 2 or 3 horses that I'm willing to spend up on. And then I try to isolate my maybe 2 or 3 long shots that I really, really like, 10-1 horse, 12-1 horse that I think are definitely going to outrun their odds. Maybe they win, maybe they don't, but they're going to run better than, 10-1 or 12-1, and be the, probably the 5th or 6th or 7th choice in a race. I think they're going to hit the board. So then I go to the app and I kind of enter those maybe 4 to 5, 6 horses into my card. And then I look at how much I have left because I've gotten the horse that I absolutely love and I want to keep at the high end and that I really have confidence in at the long shots. And now I go, okay, what else do I have to play around with on this card? And then I kind of go back to the PPs a little bit and go, okay, here's this 5-1 horse. How much do I like this horse in this race versus a 8-1 horse in another race versus a 9-2 horse in a third race? And you kind of try to look at what remaining budget you have and try to find, the best possible combination of horses. I sometimes compare it to people to playing Tetris. You try to fit the pieces together in such a way that they all kind of link together. So, you don't have to. And I think one of the big differences between kind of parimutuel and stable duel is you don't have to hit winners every race. It's not about picking 10 winners on a 10 race card. It's about picking the 10 horses that are going to cumulatively turn in the best performances. And so sometimes that's finishing third if a horse is 12-1. A horse is 12-1 on the morning line and finishes third. That's a huge win for you because that horse is getting you positive points that you would never have gotten. But from a parimutuel standpoint, a show bet's probably not going to win you a lot of money. So, those are the sorts of things that I think sometimes people who only, bet parimutually, when they come to stable duel, they're always trying to beat chalk, I think. And that's not a bad mentality to have parimutually. But in stable duel, you can embrace chalk. You can use a lot of favorites in your card as long as you feel confident about using a few long shots on the card to balance out your overall budget to stay under that $50,000 spending cap.
Yeah, I should adjust what I said because if I went through that list and saw Flightline as the highest priced horse, I probably wouldn't throw that one out. That one I'm smart enough to know that, okay, this one's definitely a winner.
Yeah.
And I think
to your point though, last week, at Monmouth, at the Salvatore Mile, Hot Rod Charlie was, $11,000 and a lot of people used Hot Rod Charlie and, came up just short like he typically does. And, that was one of those where, that was a horse that had a lot of name appeal, a lot of cachet, a lot of people used. I want to say 40% of stables used Hot Rod Charlie that day. That was going to be $11,000. And now you're spending $11,000 for a second place finish. That's not a good use of resources. So, so sometimes even those big names, you do have to still take into consideration what the rest of the card looks like. What else can you afford? Who's running underneath that horse? And maybe just trying to catch a second or a third in that race rather than spending up. But maybe you also pick the winner that day. So who knows?
And speaking of those resources, you had put together a great little graph here that clearly shows you have that memorized of the cost of the horses when you sent me this. I knew where this was coming from. And why don't you walk through a little bit, not getting too crazy about it, but what is it that, I mean, what I love here is that you've kind of assigned a position finish that you expect them to finish in with that associated price. So if you've got a 7-2 at 7,500, you're really hoping that they're catching first or second based on the percentage of your budget, right?
That's exactly right. So you have a $50,000 budget, and all of the costs for the horse are set on the morning line. So they're stable. They're not going to move no matter what happens between the morning line once betting opens. So a 9 to 5 horse is going to cost you $9,200. That is going to be 18% of your overall budget. So here's the thing. Typically in Stable Duel, you need about 350 points to feel confident about finishing in the money and finishing in the top 10 or maybe you'll even higher than that. But 350 is always a good overall point value to aim for in Stable Duel. So what I did was I took that percentage of the budget and just applied it to the 350 points. So a 9 to 5 horse, this $9,200 is 18% of your overall budget. That horse, 18% of 350 is going to be 64 points. You basically need that horse to win in order to return on investment the amount you used in terms of spending on that horse for the 9,200. So if that horse comes in second or third, or let alone fourth, fifth, or sixth, you're really in a hole now. And now you need your other horses that you've selected in the stable to really overperform. And so that's what I mean when you start looking further down the list. A horse that's 10 to 1 is only going to cost you $1,000, only 2% of your budget. If that horse gets you 7 or more points, you're doing well, which is basically a 5th place finish in Stable Duel. So again, just thinking about how many resources do you want to devote to a particular horse, and how confident are you in that horse coming in that particular place.
And a little bit of it about, I'm a New York player, so Saratoga Aqueduct, and that's kind of why my
Mm-hmm.
stable duel play has been minimal, waiting and waiting, and I didn't realize the issues that New York was having. But from a
Yeah.
morning line standpoint, the Dave Aragona is the best morning line odds maker there is. So sometimes when you're going through trying to find that value based on a bad odds maker,
Yeah.
actually New York's probably not going to be a good place to go and play stable duel because the price is going to be
Yeah.
pretty close to what you're going to be getting, right?
It is. You're right. I mean, there are certain tracks where the morning line and setting morning lines is extraordinarily difficult and not a task that I would envy or want.
No
So
thanks.
when I say I'm about it to say, this is by no means a shot at anybody setting morning lines, but there are occasionally times where morning lines will slip through the cracks, and there are just kind of obvious instances. I remember one time at Gulfstream Park. This is months ago. There was a Todd Pletcher horse jockeyed by Irad Ortiz Jr. that was going off at 12 to 1 on the morning line. And quite literally 78% of people playing that game use that horse, because you never get a Pletcher Ortiz Jr. horse at 12 to 1 for only $750 on Stable Duel. Now, the horse ended up running fourth, which is not great, but still, like, it was just like clearly. But the horse, from a parimutuel standpoint, what bet got bet down from 12 to 1 all the way down to 9 to 5. So, there was clearly kind of a market correction there between the morning line and what the horse ended up going off at. Very infamously, I think at Keeneland recently, Cheryl Spate started off at a 50 to 1 morning line horse in the Maker's Mark Turf Mile, and I think ended up going off at 9 to 1 and winning that race. So, there are always those sorts of things that happen with morning lines. And that's part of what you also look for in a handicapping, is sometimes you just find a horse and you're going and you think to yourself, oh, wow, this horse is going to get bet down a lot. And those are typically good horses to use in Stable Duel, because if a horse is 8 to 1, it's going to cost you $3,000. If the horse ends up going off at 4 to 1, which would normally cost you $7,000, you can think of it as getting a $7,000 horse for $3,000. So you're getting a little bit of a bargain there. And a horse that might on the morning line be the 4th or 5th choice, by the time post time goes, might be the second or third choice. So, you feel more confident using those long shots sometimes, where you see there might be some market corrections between morning line and post time. But, going back to your point about New York, the nice thing about up there is they also have really full fields a lot of times. And typically larger fields also lead to better opportunities for long shots, particularly in the turf races. That's always been one of the complaints I think a lot of players have at tracks like Penn National on the East Coast or Santa Anita on the West Coast, really small fields. And therefore, you don't get a lot of like these 12 to 1, 10 to 1, really live long shots that you might in a super deep field at Saratoga or Belmont or Aqueduct. So, just there's always some pluses and minuses to those type of really strong morning lines, field size, etc.
And you had mentioned that sort of goal of 330 points to get to sort of finish in the money. How does the small fields or the bigger fields affect that amount? And you provided me some examples where, although that's
Oh yeah.
maybe what you're focused on, it doesn't
Yeah.
always have to be that much to get you in there.
No, it doesn't. So, yeah, here are three examples that just took place over the last 10 days, basically, or between 10 days of each other. And on the far right, you'll see that there's a Santa Anita contest on June 11th. And my dad actually won this contest, Gran Papito,
I was very
named after the
surprised
family dog.
I was very surprised you sent me one where you were behind him. I was like, wow, he's got to hopefully mention this.
Of course, of course. I always have a chance. I got a shout out to my dad. But he won that one. It was a Santa Anita $3 contest, $3 or a limit of 3 entries. So nobody could do more than 3 entries. So, the most you could spend is $9. And I did 3 entries, and 2 of them managed to get in the top 10. But you'll see that my 10th place entry was only 250 points. That is not a lot of points for traditionally. And this was an instance where, that day at Santa Anita, there were a lot of upsets. There were a lot of horses that people were not choosing that were winning. And so a lot of us were just getting second and third places throughout most of the card. And so the overall point total was a lot smaller. It was also a little bit of an interesting card at Santa Anita in that it had a few more races on than maybe normal. Then you come over to the Ascot race. Obviously a lot of us don't play Ascot very often. Really Royal is, we play it once a year when it comes out. But that was one where you can see the top 10, 10th place, Rawls Deep, who's a really, really good player, got 320 points. So 70 points higher for 10th place as opposed to the Santa Anita contest. And that was one where, myself and Kurt, who finished first that day, we both were kind of on a roll. We had 6 or 7 winners that day. But it's important to point out, there's only 7 races at Royal Ascot. And so because there are only 7 races, you're going to have to double up in multiple races. Well, just by sheer mathematics, if you start doubling up in more races, you're going to have more opportunities to hit winners. More opportunities to hit winners means more points. More points means that your overall point total is going to keep going up and up and up. And you see that in the final entry at Assiniboia. Assiniboia also only has 7 races on a card. Again, you have to select 10 overall horses. You're going to have to double up in at least 3 races. If you skip a race, you'll have to double up in 4. So you're doubling up in 3. Again, a lot more opportunities to catch winners there. That day I had over 400 points and still only finished tied for second. You'll see 10th place, 368 points, which is incredible. So like I said, 350 is always kind of a moving target, but if you can always think about trying to get 350, you're typically going to do pretty well. Sometimes maybe it just, you're going to fall just out of the money. But a lot of times that's a pretty good number to point to. And certainly the fewer races on a card, the higher the overall point values are going to be at the end. The other thing I'll say is and this is kind of, Bree Mott, who is one of the people who works for Stable Duel and is very active on social media. She'll always talk to people about this. A lot of times the lower dollar contests have much higher point totals because there are just more people playing in them. And so with more people comes more opportunities for people to hit 5, 6, 7 winners on a card. And if you go and play the $50 contests, a lot of times the winning point totals are not nearly as high, but it's just about the risk reward of I'm going to spend $50 to enter this contest and, and see kind of where the chips fall. But there's a lot of times where, those free ride stables, those $2, $3, $5 stables or $5 contests vastly outperform the $50 winning table in those entries. So just always something to keep in mind as you become more comfortable and more knowledgeable in playing Stable Duel.
Yeah, and what you said there brought up a good point. We've talked about Finke's first 2 questions here, but the third question was a question that I had, which was, is it better to play a single horse per race, or is multiple okay? Now, in an instance that you just talked about, when there's only 7 races, you have to double up. Mm-hmm. But when you hit some of these tracks that have 12, 13, 14 races, I've sort of, for some reason, and I don't know why, naturally subscribed to this notion that I need to have a different horse from a separate race, meaning not double up in a particular race. And I don't know where that ingrained in my head that that's just how I play. It wasn't something I thought about. It was, let me just go through and try and find one horse in each race, because I almost felt like I was playing against myself in a way. But if you know what the exact is going to be, it's obviously that's a good bet, right? You're going to get a first and a second. But I think there's a little bit of a
Absolutely.
mentality of, well, I need to find those $60 winners because, as I
Yeah.
had pointed out of trying to get to that 350 in one of my messages to you, I said I kind of feel like I need to hit between 4 and 6 winners. But as
Yeah.
you said, second is just as good. So do you
Yeah.
subscribe to the notion of I need to have a different horse in every race, or is it just day by day and it's always different?
I think it's a little bit as day by day. I don't. So from a purely kind of theoretical perspective, going with one horse in every race, or a different horse in each race of the card, and separating them out, and not doubling up anywhere. Theoretically, you have maximized your point potential by doing that, because you could potentially hit 10 winners and get 600 points or 600 plus points. Nobody's ever done that. The best I've ever seen is a little over 500 points. I think 7 or 8 winners on a card, which was absolutely incredible. And I think that the other thing to keep in mind though is if you start combining exactas or using, multiple horses in races, obviously your maximum point total starts to come down in terms of your maximum theoretical point total. So I think that's where some of that comes from. And it comes from a smart place, from like a rat choice, sort of mentality. But practically, it's unlikely that we're going to hit 10 winners. So you're a lot of times better off hitting that exacta. But I will say, I typically tend to be very strategic about when I use those exactas. And I'll kind of give you a couple of examples of when. One is if I like a really heavy favorite and a long shot. And if I like those two to run 1-2, because the way I justify it to myself, if I'm going to spend $9,000 on a horse, and then I also double that up with a horse that's $8,000, that's a terrible use of assets, because that's now $17,000. And the most I can get out of those two horses is 100 points if they hit the exacta, which is not going to get things done because I've not left myself with a lot of money for the rest of my entries. But if I like that $9,000 horse and I also like a 10-1 horse that's only going to cost you $1,000, well, now here's the thing. To combine, that's only $10,000. That's $5,000 for per horse. Well, that's exactly what your stable duel average is, $50,000 for 10 horses. So I'm staying in my average by selecting those two together. And if for some reason the long shot upsets the favorite, hey, no, I don't care if they go one. It's kind of like an exacta box. I don't care if they finish first, second, or second, first. As long as they get me that 100 points, that's the most important thing. So a lot of times I like to, do that. Use a favorite and a long shot when I double up in a lot of instances. And then the other time is when there are scratches. And this is, I think, a really important point for people to recognize, that scratches obviously have a huge impact from a pari-mutuel standpoint, but the beauty of Stable Duel is that everything's locked in based upon morning line odds. And when tracks, particularly the Midwestern tracks, like Indiana Grand is a track I'm thinking of right now, just off the top of my head, when those tracks go off turf, those turf races get moved to the dirt, oh my gosh, are there a ton of scratches. And so suddenly a 10-horse field is now a 4-horse field. And some of those horses that are still running morning line were 10-1, 12-1 horses. Well, that's fantastic, because now they're guaranteed not to finish any worse than fourth if they're in a 4-horse field. I've even seen some 3-horse races at Indiana Grand. And so that's one of those where you contemplate just using all 3 horses that are running, because you're going to just by default hit the trifecta and get about 125-ish points, for that. So it's one of those where you really want to pay attention to scratches, because they can have a huge impact on your strategy going into, how do I want to approach this race in terms of maybe attacking underneath. Maybe there's just one big favorite now, and after all these scratches have come out, so you can approach it one of two ways. You could go, I feel so much more confident in this favorite that I'm willing to spend up because I know I'm going to get a winner there. Or you can go, there's so few horses, there's this one favorite, maybe that favorite falters, but hey, listen, there's only 3 or 4 other horses in this race. I'm only going to spend $750. And if this 12-1 horse just outruns 1 or 2 other horses, I'm in second or third place, which is great. And so you can kind of approach it a couple different ways, or you can combine the two and use both in those instances. So there's a lot of strategy that goes into, I think, trying to leverage scratches, like I said, particularly off turf. one of the big tracks that I also pay attention to for that is Gulfstream, because they go from the turf to the Tapeta. They go run on the synthetic. That's something that, if for those people who play Gulfstream a lot, the Tapeta is always, I think, a different surface. A lot of people have a lot of opinions about it. I really like it because I've hit a lot of winners on it, but I can see why people might get frustrated by it sometimes. But that's another one where sometimes you can find value, and and sometimes too, when those races go off turf, suddenly those PPs become important, because now suddenly those horses that don't scratch are the ones with all the dirt experience. And so now a horse that was a super big long shot on the grass now looks like the absolute favorite now that the race is back on dirt and its preferred surface. So those are always things to keep in mind, and try to think about when you're putting together a stable with, whether it's a 14 race card or a 7 race card.
And that's a good opportunity for me to just give my own little selfless plug here of my June 12th Gulfstream, when I actually put in $10 because I think I got crushed on the 11th. So I said, well, I still want to play today, but I don't want to put too much money in pari-mutuel, so let's put together a Gulfstream stable duel. And that's actually where I kind of got the idea to continue this show. And that 8 there, the 6-1, was actually my last horse that I, as you said, tried to squeeze in when I had my last what's 6-1, how much ever that would cost is how much I had left. There you go.
Yeah, 5,000.
And Lady Emily was the last, and I was out to dinner, and I checked, and I didn't realize how good I was doing, and I saw, oh my God, I had a 15-1 winner, a 6-1 winner, and then of course, horse player, my wife went to the bathroom, and I was sitting with my buddy, and the race was just finishing, and there we were cheering on the 12, who closed like a we were high-fiving each other on a Sunday Gulfstream at 5 o'clock, and my wife came back and she's like, just shaking her head. you two have a problem. I'm like, no, we just won.
That's awesome. And that's a great example. It's funny. That reminds me of my first big win as well, because I was just getting started, and I kind of put in, I think, about $300. I just deposited $300 into the Stable Duel account. I was like, we're going to see where this goes. And I really rolled the dice much more than I typically do. And I entered a $150 contest at Del Mar. And it was like a $20,000 pot or something like that day. And I got really busy with something. And I forget what, because normally horse racing over the weekends is like what I do. But I got really busy with something, and maybe I had a date. I don't know. But all of a sudden I come back home and I check, and I finished second. And oh my God, I finished second. And I was so new to Stable Duel that I didn't realize that you didn't have to win money. I thought, oh man, I finished second. I lost. I can't believe it. Like, what a excruciating way. And then next thing you know, I look at my my menu, my account, and I had like $1,900, and I was like, oh my God, like I won money. And so it was, it was one of those days where, like I said, that was like one of my first contests that I really did well in. And, it's just, but it is funny, sometimes, and that's one nice thing that I actually really like about Stable Duel over the week is, a lot of those midweek cards, parks and, places like that are, post times at 12 o'clock or something like that. I'm at work. And so I'll just set those, in over the morning or something like that. I'll set my stables in the morning, and then I just kind of forget about them. And I come back to them at the end of the day, and I look and I'm like, oh, I had a great day today. Or I had a terrible day today. What was I thinking? But it's a nice way to, I always tell people it's a nice way. And you mentioned it earlier. It's a nice way to play a whole card for a small amount of money. And I think if people really like handicapping, I think Stable Duel is much more of a handicapper's game than maybe somebody who's a great pari-mutuel player. And sometimes I think, like I said, I think sometimes really very, very successful bettors have a hard time transitioning to Stable Duel initially, because their mentality has to change, because you're not trying to beat the favorite every time. You're not trying to catch a winner every time. You're trying to get second. You're trying to get third. You're trying to get fourth with a long shot. That's okay. And you're not having to hit a home run every single time. The biggest thing to avoid is a big negative number. That's the biggest thing to avoid, is horses that'll get you that negative 30. That just kills all your momentum and now forces the rest of your stable to vastly have to overperform to still get in the money. So a lot of times it's about just minimizing that kind of risk in some of your horse selections. So a horse that I always like to use as an example of this is a horse like Atone. Atone is a turf horse that runs routinely the grade 1, grade 2 level and is typically like a 10-1, 12-1 morning line horse at that level. Atone just never runs bad races, though. Atone always finishes like third or fourth in those races. That's spectacular. In Stable Duel, you give me a 12-1 horse that finishes third, I'm thrilled. But I would never bet it. I would never bet Atone to win necessarily. But Atone's a horse I love using when especially when he's at those prices. So there are certain horses that you come back to because you just know they're going to run an honest effort, as opposed to a horse that may, if you look back in those past performances, horses that get eased up a lot, horses that finish, 15, 20 lengths back, even if it's in a maiden claimer, that's a big red flag for me because now that's a horse that could really get me a lot of negative points if it's going to repeat that type of performance. So I'd much rather pick a horse that finishes fifth by 3 lengths and is at least right there. And maybe it doesn't get me a lot of points than taking a big swing at a horse that kind of alternates between running well and finishing 20 lengths back. So it's you never know.
Yeah, and as I try to educate on this show to the viewers, there's a type of horse called need the lead, and those are the types of horses that
Yes.
I absolutely avoid because if they don't get the lead, they generally
Yep.
finish way behind, and that's the types of ones that I'm really hesitant on using in stable duel, especially if you know they're going to have a trouble making the lead that day, and that could be to one that maybe people see it as the only speed, and okay, I can make a case there. If you have 3 horses that
Mhm.
all have speed, and you have one that you see 1-1-1, and then 1-1, and then
Yeah.
sixth or ninth, I
Yeah.
avoid need the lead as like I can't like you don't know about. One other thing I'd like
Yeah.
to talk about is have you used Equine Edge at all? I'll give a little toss to my buddies over at Equine Edge because they have a great morning line
Okay.
tool built into their system for someone like me that has trouble figuring out what the eighth race's odds are going to be on the favorite. I just don't have
Yeah.
that skill set yet. Equine Edge is an automated system that gives you what they think are the fair odds of the morning line for those horses. And so
Mhm.
that's a tool that I have used very successfully when I'm doing my stable duels is to know, okay, this computer system thinks that this horse is valuable at 9-2, yet the morning line is 8-1. Well, that's definitely a horse that I'll grab. And so if anybody's out there playing around with Equine Edge, they'll give you 3 free races every day. They decide what they are. They might not match up with what you're playing with Stable Duel. But it's a great tool to also utilize as far as trying to figure out what those fair odds are for a horse that, like someone like me, has trouble figuring out what they probably should be.
Yeah, and I think after we saw the betting in the Kentucky Derby and the Preakness, I think we all don't know what the fair odds are going to be sometimes. Maybe Happy Jack will go off on a morning line favorite in the next race. So what the betting public does sometimes, you just have to shake your head at. But you're right, Equine Edge does a very good job, and those are the big public day races. That the whole public's getting involved and things like that. But typically, those morning lines are, and you mentioned David up in New York. I mean, a lot of these morning lines are usually pretty solid. But you can always find those market correction, those opportunities for to exploit in stable duel.
One other thing, the Stable Duel, when you select a horse, it has some statistics on it, and it gives you some value.
Yeah.
Can you just
Hmm.
give a little bit of insight? Because you've told me that you've done well with not even using past performances, and you had sent me 2
Yeah.
examples here that might not be exactly that, but just to give viewers
Yeah.
a sense of these speed rank and value rank, and how do you utilize those when you're putting together a stable?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a horse that ran. Tis funny, ran at Assiniboia last week, and this was a 4 to 5 horse, going to cost you $11,000. But there's a couple of things that you want to pay attention to. One is the speed rank. Obviously, this was the fastest horse. That's a combination of the last several buyer speed figures, basically, or kind of the industry speed figures that. Stable Duel kind of averages them together and ranks them relative to the rest of the field they're running against that day. The value rank is based upon how many points this horse traditionally gets you in a Stable Duel contest. And so this horse typically gets you the most points out of those running against them that day. And so this was kind of the obvious choice to use. And the other thing to pay attention to, so you get a lot of information. I mean, for a small screen, they really do pack a lot in there because you can see the past performance in terms of the date, the track, the level of the race, the distance, the surface, and the finish, and the number of lengths. You also get to see the pedigree, the jockey, the trainer, the owner, the breeder. You get a little bit of the workout information as well. You obviously see the career effort there. But at the very top left-hand corner is a very important piece of information, and that is the percentage of other stables using that horse. So in the case of Tis Funny, you saw that there were, at the time I took this screenshot, which I think was actually at the end of, after the races had started, there were 52 overall entries. 40 of the 52 entries were using this horse, 76%. So that's a horse that everybody is using. And when you're going through, sometimes that's something to pay attention to. If you want to, kind of either go against the grain and maybe bet against this horse, or if you want to go, man, everybody's on this horse, I should get on this horse too, depending on how confident you feel in a particular race. So that's one where, like I said, you really saw a lot of value. Now, here's what's funny. It's Wits Coco was in that exact same race. Wits Coco was going off at 8-1, only $3,000. Had a little, obviously a lower speed rank, slightly lower value rank, as you might suspect. But I liked Wits Coco because Wits Coco at least finished in the money, 5 out of the 11 careers. Also was coming back from a really long layoff, but the trainer, Mike Taphorn, has a pretty good record coming off a long layoff. It's not uncommon for these horses up at Assiniboia to come back from long layoffs because they have such a short racing season up there, and then they come back. And so I used both Tis Funny and Wits Coco. I did get that kind of what I mentioned earlier, where I took the $11,000 horse and the $3,000 horse and put them together. Now, here's what's funny. Wits Coco won the race. And so Wits Coco is the big upset. But you'll see Wits Coco is also used by 48% of the stables. So that's another thing to do. If you're going through and if you're struggling with a card and maybe you are choosing between 3 or 4 long shots and you just go, I don't know which of these horses I really want to get behind. Sometimes going to the Stable Duel app and just kind of using the law of large numbers to some extent and using kind of crowdsourcing can help you out a little bit, because you can look before you even enter and go, how many people are using this horse? Are other people seeing what I'm seeing, basically? It can sometimes kind of validate your eye test a little bit and go, oh, this is a really popular long shot. And sometimes if I don't have a good feel for a particular race, I kind of look at, well, where's the public going on this one? Where's the Stable Duel public going? And sometimes I kind of go, okay, I'm going to go with the public, because here's the thing. You're going in, you're going to win relative to how everyone else does. So if you get on a horse that 76% of the people have, that horse runs great, well, everybody prospers. Everybody's going to get a lot of points. But if that horse runs poorly, here's the thing. So many people are using it, you're not going to drop down that far in the standings because everybody else had that horse too. So it's one of those things where you can, like I said, kind of be a little bit more strategic when you start getting in there and looking at how are different horses being used in different races. And like I said, sometimes it's worth going against the grain, because you can look at it and go, I just think the public has this one wrong. I think, this horse that maybe only 5% of people are using is the best horse. That obviously comes with a big risk and a big reward. The big reward is if that horse wins, you're going to lap the field. You're going to make up a lot of points on those people who didn't pass by that horse. The risk is, of course, if that horse runs poorly, now you've really dropped in comparison to your other players in the contest. You're going to have to make that up in other races. So just something to keep in mind as people get started. Don't be afraid to look at what other people are doing. Peering over at somebody else's homework is not against the rules in Stable Duel.
Yeah, that's awesome. I didn't actually realize that that's what that was, so that I've learned something, which is the goal of this. And that's,
okay, good.
yeah, I didn't realize that, and I've done a lot more NHC tournaments than I have Stable Duel, and how key would that be? That would just make it easy for some of us, right? To know that you're the only one that has this, because that's really what sets you apart in those tournaments, is finding the horse that other people are not going to have. Especially in the NHC when they're basing it off of $2 win place. But that's an excellent piece of information that people should take heed to when they're going through those, to see what those percentages are. And that's probably something I would put after you do your own handicapping, me personally.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It only makes you smile more when you say, oh, I love this horse, and only 10 or 20% have that, then I'm all in.
Absolutely. No, those are the great ones to use, is when you feel really good. And what's funny is a lot of times if I feel really good, and I usually will do multiple entries in a lot of these contests, but there's usually one entry where it's just my first impression I try not to be clouded by anything else. And I just plow through and I do the entry and I don't even look at what anybody else is doing. And I just press submit. And then after the fact, I'll take a look at, well, let's see where the public is on this. And, maybe I'm aligned with them on some and not aligned with the others. But I think, that's something I try to do with handicapping a lot. I try to learn from other people, but I also I don't want to be influenced by other people a lot of times, in terms of a pick. And so I try to learn from people and and that's one great thing about the horse racing community on Twitter. So everybody's willing to offer advice and give their perspectives. And it's great to learn from. It's just a sponge to soak all that stuff up. But when it comes time to actually making picks, making selections, I really try to stick to my own process and try not to look at what anybody else is thinking, on big race days or on weekend cards, things like that. I really try to do my own homework in that regard. And then afterwards, I try to then go and compare how my homework compares to everybody else's to see, whether or not I'm completely off base and have really hot takes, or whether or not I'm aligned up with some other folks whose opinions I value.
Yeah, I'm the same way. You start following them, and as soon as you start following one, they go cold, and then you start following another guy, and then they go cold, and you're like, "Is it me? Why is every time I follow you, you go cold?" And we were talking about Sarah, who's an unbelievable handicapper, and I marveled at how well she had done. And then I think it was last Sunday, I tailed some of her picks for Belmont, and I think she missed them all. And she even tweeted out, she's like, "I hope you're following me today." And I'm like, "Oh, I was the guy that was following you today, of course." So I'm that guy. I'm Mush in the movie when you come down and they're ripping up all the tickets before the race is over. That's me. I was going to wrap, but I have to ask you now, because two stables to me, how do you approach that second stable? Are you playing it completely different? Because that would absolutely drive me nuts when you got one winner on stable 1 and then your next winner in race 2 is on stable 2, and you're like, oh man, if I just put them together, and that's how I got approaching NHC. I'm like, I can't do it because it drives me too much nuts when I have 4 winners here and 4 winners there, and if they had just been together, I would have been in a much better place.
Yeah. So a lot of times, so it depends on the amount of the contest in some instances. So a lot of times, like I said at the beginning, a lot of times I will identify 2 or 3 favorites that I really, really like, 2 or 3 long shots I really want to use. A lot of times those are the basis of both or of all my stables. So I'll kind of stick to the same maybe base of 4 or 5 horses that I really want to use. And where I vary between entries is those middle 5 horses. And that's where I'll just kind of go, I kind of feel lukewarm about this one, lukewarm about that one. Okay, I'm going to use this one in this stable and that one in another stable, and that sort of thing. So I know some people who, Phil Bennett, who's a really good guy on Twitter and is a good Stable Duel player as well, Phil B on Stable Duel. Phil, a lot of times when he does his entries, it's funny, he does the same entry for all 3. Like if he does 3 entries, it's the exact same for all 3 of them. And there's a risk reward to that, which is if you have a good day, all 3 of your stables are doing really well. But the negative is, of course, if you have a bad day, then all 3 of your stables are out of the money. Spreading it around a little bit, making some variations, it's a little bit like spreading your bets at the roulette table. Like you don't put everything all in black. You don't put you spread them around, odds, evens, you play the corners. And so that's kind of the way I'd like to approach it. And then sometimes I just like to have fun too, like especially when there's like a $1 game. Or a $2 game, I'll sit there and I'll just use the Stable Duel app just for my own edification. And I'll sit there and go, I'm going to select the horse that has the number 1 value in every single race and just like see how that horse does. Or I'm going to pick the horse that has the number 1 speed figure in every single race and see how that horse does. Like I just kind of do it just to experiment and play around. And it's like $2. And I'm like, maybe it does something, maybe it doesn't. But it's just interesting. And I try to keep track of that stuff as well, just to kind of see. But like I said, a lot of times I try to stick to a base, the 4 or 5 horses, and then just make some variations from there. But yeah, it drives me nuts when, one stable's doing well and then all of a sudden it hits a snag and it's my other stable that like picked the winner. And I'm like, if only I had done this, so there's definitely those days that are frustrating.
Yeah. As if the sport's not frustrating enough, you're doubling up on it. I think this was awesome. I mean, you could tell we could go forever on this, and I think we've given out some good advice. I really appreciate you giving some education on what's made you so good. I think the advice of, it's only $1 or it's only the free game, and just throw in some extra entries and get used to playing it. I do wish the app would. I wish I could go into an event or a tournament that's happening and see how people are doing. Right now, it's only if you're in the state in that particular tournament that you can see how people are doing, because it would be great to be able to go in and see, okay, what is winning that day. And Bremont does a good job of posting the standings after the fact, but there's a little bit of me that wants to get in there and see, what's going on that particular day.
I will say that's a little bit of a clunky way to do it, but if you have the opportunity to follow other players on the app, and so if you follow someone, you can look at that person's profile and see how they're doing in races that day. I've never tried to then click in to see but I don't think you can see all the standings. You can just see how that one person's doing in that particular contest. So I think I know that Bree is doing a lot of updates to the app. One very exciting one that's going to be coming soon is you're actually going to be able to watch live races in the app.
Awesome.
And which is going to be really cool. So there's a bunch of app updates. And the one thing I'll also say, that maybe the final thing I'll say about Stable Duel is they have great customer service. Bree is wonderful about taking advice and feedback. I can't tell you the number of times that my dad texts me something, because he does it all the time, and he's like, "Tell Bree that there should be more low dollar contests at Assiniboia." And I'm like, "All right." And I text Bree and like, "Bree, Dad wants more low dollar contests at Assiniboia." And the next week there's a $2 contest at Assiniboia. I mean, they really do listen to their customers, whether that's like limited entry contests, high dollar contests, low dollar contests. Trying different tracks, different ways to divide the pot, things like that. Top 3, top 5, top 10 payouts, that sort of stuff. So they're really great. So once you get in there, if there's something you're not that crazy about, let people know, because they're really good about trying to make games as user-friendly and player-friendly as possible.
I think it's that Bree's just catering to her high roller table. That's what it is. When you get to text her, you're the high roller table. You get the penthouse room. And if I had to request, it would be when you're looking at a horse and they're showing that value page, you should be able to swipe left and right. That's what drives me nuts. With Equine Edge too, you have to back out of a horse to go to the next one. It's like you should be able to just swipe through them really quickly. As you're going through your iPad. So text Bree when you're over here.
That's a really good idea. Yeah, all right. On it, Colin.
Actually, tell her to watch the whole show and catch the last 3 minutes when I give her my advice.
Yeah, no, that's great advice, actually. That would be super user-friendly. That'd be really nice. I would like that.
I'm all about making it simple for people. Thanks so much, Matt. This has been awesome. We'll definitely be in touch. Follow Phil to Menace on Twitter. He will be posting all his winning on Stable Duel. And when I finally win, I've gotten a lot of 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5ths. When I finally win, you'll be the first one to hear about it.
I love it. That's fantastic.
Have a great night. Thank you.
Thanks, Colin.